Let me be clear. I never expected my life to unfold this way. I thought I was living the standard story of a 20-something who meets a decent guy, figures out compatibility, and works toward a solid future. Things rarely go as planned, though. And I want to share the details because I spent far too long in the dark about who my boyfriend really was. Maybe someone out there will understand what I went through and what I chose to do in the end. People on Reddit always talk about hindsight being 20/20. But trust me, sometimes the truth is so close, you still can't see it until it's almost too late. I met him about 3 years ago through a mutual friend. In typical big city fashion, we'd both migrated from smaller hometowns, excited by the opportunities that come with bustling streets, new jobs, and the promise of broader horizons. He was the friend of a friend at a casual birthday gathering. I remember noticing him because he had this way of grabbing a crowd's attention with minimal effort. There was a charm there, like someone used to being the star of every room. I used to admire that. I used to think it was one of his best qualities. After that first meeting, we exchanged numbers. I felt flattered, to be honest. He was the type of guy I'd see and assume was out of my league. Not that I have low self-esteem. It's just that he seemed so slick, so put together, so comfortable taking up space. Meanwhile, I still felt like I was working out my identity. New job in marketing, new city with overpriced rent, new everything. But then he started texting me regularly, asked me out for coffee. I said yes because I was curious, and let's admit it, a bit smitten. We began dating casually, bonding over random stuff like the best local restaurants and our shared annoyance with endless public transit delays. For a long time, our relationship felt normal. He'd pick me up from work, or I'd crash at his place. Sometimes he'd look pensive, especially after a phone call, and he'd claim it was something about his family or stress at work. I never pried. If he didn't want to talk, that was his choice. I didn't want to be pushy. Months turned into a year, and then another. We had the usual ups and downs. We bickered sometimes over finances or how he'd refuse to do simple chores without me nagging. Typical couple stuff. Or so I told myself. My biggest concern was that I loved him more than he loved me. Deep down, I had that nagging sense, almost a fear, that I was the second choice. We'd never talked about exes in detail. He'd only mentioned one serious relationship in college. He told me they'd broken up because she moved abroad for a career opportunity, and he hadn't wanted to do long distance. According to him, it was a clean break. No lingering feelings, just a chapter in his life that closed. He never seemed upset talking about it, so I let it go. I wish I'd trusted my instincts more. I saw red flags, but I chalked them up to my own anxieties. For instance, I'd catch glimpses of a look on his face whenever he scrolled through his social media. Sometimes he'd get quiet in the middle of an otherwise pleasant day. And that phone call from a number he never saved, the one that made his hands shake just a bit. But I never had evidence of anything sinister, so I'd bury the anxiety. 2.5 years into our relationship, we started discussing the future more seriously. He knew I wanted marriage and kids someday. I wasn't pushing for it immediately, but I made it clear that I was looking for a partner who'd be on board with those goals when the time was right. He said he understood, and he'd give non-committal answers about, yeah, in a few years maybe. I figured that was fine. I didn't want to rush. Then came that Thursday. The day was unremarkable. We were both at my place working on our laptops. At some point, he got a notification on his phone. I happened to glance over, and it seemed to be social media news of some sort. He went pale. Next thing I knew, he turned off his phone and left the room. I gave him a few minutes, thinking maybe it was some sort of bad news about a friend or relative. By the time I found him, he was in the bathroom, just sitting on the edge of the tub with his head in his hands, tears rolling down his face. I was startled. He wasn't usually the type to cry over anything. I approached him gingerly and asked what was wrong. He looked at me with such sadness. Even in that moment, I didn't connect it to his ex. His crying felt like heartbreak, but I had no reason to believe it was about someone else's engagement. Finally, he mumbled, "It's nothing. It's just a friend. Her life is moving on," and it just hit me hard. We were supposed to go out that evening, but he insisted he wanted to stay home. I hovered nearby, confused, and he snapped at me to give him space. That stung. I felt helpless watching him cry, and I wondered what was so devastating about some random friend's news. I tried to bring him tea, but he waved me away and locked himself in the bedroom. I ended up sleeping on the couch because he never reemerged. The next morning, he was still distant, and I decided to give him time. Maybe something had happened that he wasn't ready to share. Around mid-morning, he came up to me like nothing was wrong. He put his arms around me, told me he loved me, told me I was amazing. For a moment, relief washed over me. I thought maybe he was going to open up, or at least express gratitude for my patience. Instead, he got on one knee and pulled out a ring. A ring I'd never seen before. A sparkly diamond with a simple band that looked suspiciously brand new. My heart pounded, part excitement, part confusion. The day before, he'd been bawling, and now he was proposing. It didn't feel right. It felt rushed, out of the blue. So I asked, "Are you serious? What changed between yesterday and now?" He tried to smile. "I just realized how much I love you, how I shouldn't wait anymore." It sounded hollow. I'd seen him in tears over something, or someone less than 24 hours ago. Now he was proclaiming undying devotion. I tried to summon joy, but all I felt was cold suspicion. I'm not a naive woman. I knew something wasn't lining up. So I told him, as gently as I could, that I couldn't accept right now, that we needed to talk. His expression collapsed into shock, then anger. He pressed me. "I'm giving you exactly what you've wanted." But it felt forced and manipulative. I ended up walking out of my own apartment to clear my head. I stayed away the whole day, processing. By the time I returned that night, the ring was gone, and so was he. There was a terse text on my phone. "Take some time to think. I'll contact you soon." The next few days were eerily quiet. I didn't try to reach out, and he never messaged me again. Part of me felt guilty and wondered if I'd missed my chance at happiness. Another part of me kept replaying the tears, the unknown phone notification, the fact that he didn't respond well to my hesitation. A week passed, then another. I floated through my days in a daze, going to work, forcing a smile around coworkers, ignoring well-meaning invites from friends. Then I got a message from one of our mutual friends saying, "Hey, did you know he's gone? Flew overseas?" I froze. That was news to me. I asked, "What do you mean?" He replied, "I heard from someone that he left the country to reconnect with an old flame." My stomach churned. Who else could that old flame be but his ex from college? My mind flashed back to how he'd never truly seemed over that relationship, how I'd catch glimpses of something unresolved in him. Suddenly, I felt like everything made sense. That meltdown after hearing she was engaged. He must have realized she was getting on with her life, and it wrecked him. So the next day, maybe out of desperation, he proposed to me, hoping to fill that void or prove something to himself. When I didn't jump for joy, he decided to chase after her. As soon as that suspicion formed, I felt a cold wave of betrayal wash over me. I couldn't even cry at first. I just felt numb. Eventually, the tears did come. In private, I wept for hours. I wept for the stupidity I felt for ignoring my gut, for the illusions I'd built of a loving future with him. I also raged. How dare he treat me like a consolation prize? How dare he propose one day, then skip town without even talking to me properly? But I refused to let that anger destroy me. Instead, I decided I deserved closure, even if it had to be on my terms. I started by calling the mutual friend who'd told me he left. That friend put me in touch with someone else who had more details. According to them, he'd hopped on a plane under the pretense of visiting family. But apparently, he was set on tracking down that ex. She'd just gotten engaged, so he was determined to see if he could stop the wedding or convince her to come back to him. The friend claimed he'd made it sound romantic, like some big Hollywood gesture. But all I felt was disgust. He'd proposed to me not out of love or genuine commitment, but because he was panicking about her. When that didn't work, he ran to her. I needed to confirm everything, so I decided to do my own investigation. I had no illusions about wanting him back. The notion of forgiving him was unimaginable. I just wanted the truth, every bit of it, so I could eventually move on in peace, and possibly get some revenge that felt thorough. You can't just walk all over people's hearts and expect them to vanish quietly. Not in my world. My first real lead came when a friend pointed me to the ex's social media. She'd never blocked it, though I'd never actively looked at it before. Lo and behold, the ex, let's call her Elena, had posted about her engagement. Photos of her and her fiancé, all smiles. And there, in some of the tagged pictures, I saw a familiar face lurking in the background. My ex-boyfriend. My blood boiled. He was in the same city as her, apparently shamelessly inserting himself into her orbit. In one shot, you could see him standing off to the side with a forced smile, while Elena looked a bit uncomfortable. That told me enough. He was definitely pursuing her, right there in her new life. I felt a wave of fury so intense it nearly made me sick. Let him chase. Let him make a fool of himself in front of her fiancé, her family, the whole lot. But I wasn't about to let him just slip away from all accountability back here. I wanted him to pay for the humiliation, heartbreak, and confusion I'd endured. I had no illusions that I could physically make him pay, but I was determined to dismantle the comfortable life he'd built on deceit. I started small. I had some of his personal belongings at my place. Expensive gadgets, a signed jersey from a favorite sports star, a box of random keepsakes. I'd once teased him about being a hoarder of nostalgic items. Now I saw an opportunity. I carefully gathered everything he left behind, which he'd told me in a text that he'd pick up soon. I took photos of it all, made a quick note in a text saying, "Items can be picked up by appointment only," and then waited. No reply. Next, I contacted the property manager of our old apartment. We used to share the lease until I moved to my own place. I let them know he'd left the country without settling a small utilities bill that was in both our names. I asked for a record of the missed payment. I had a suspicion. If he planned on returning, He might ignore such trivial matters until they caused bigger trouble. Sure enough, there was an outstanding balance, not huge, but significant enough to send to collections, if not settled. I paid my half, then I ensured his half remained in his name. I politely asked the manager to keep me updated on attempts to contact him, just so I'd have a paper trail. Petty? Maybe. But he'd proposed, then vanished to chase an ex, and I had zero guilt about letting a bill go to collections in his name. While doing this, I discovered something else. My ex had never fully severed his professional ties in our city. He was a freelance consultant for a local marketing firm, and a lot of his pay came through direct deposit. He probably assumed he could pop back in whenever he wanted. I reached out to a colleague at that firm, someone who'd become a close friend of mine, and innocently inquired if they'd heard from him. She told me he'd simply emailed the boss saying he'd be out of the country for personal reasons, and to keep any future checks on hold. That gave me an idea. If he was expecting them to hold checks, maybe they'd get suspicious if they found out the real reason he left was to sabotage someone else's engagement. It wasn't exactly relevant to his job, but it certainly tarnished his professional reliability. People talk. Reputations matter. So I whispered a subtle word to a friend who might pass it on to the right ears. That might sound malicious, but guess what? Don't treat your partner like a backup plan if you don't want them ensuring you lose credibility. I wanted to know how his chase overseas was going. From the pictures, Elena looked far from thrilled. I suspected that she had her own drama to sort out, or perhaps she was politely ignoring him. But my ex was persistent. I guess that's the big gesture trait in him that had once seemed so charming. He kept popping up in photos, at group gatherings, looking more and more desperate. A part of me almost pitied him. Almost. Then I remembered how I'd found him crying over her engagement, and how he'd tried to rope me into a marriage without any sincerity. Pity vanished. A few weeks later, a rumor reached me that he had managed to arrange a talk with her. I heard from someone that he declared his undying love, telling her he'd made a huge mistake letting her go all those years ago, and that he was willing to do anything to win her back, even sabotage her wedding plans. Let that sink in. Sabotage. Meanwhile, I was just the girl he'd left behind, the one who had the decency to walk away when the proposal smelled fishy. The memory of that ring, the look in his eyes that morning, and how cheap and rushed it felt still made me clench my fists. I realized that if he was in sabotage mode, maybe I could feed him a bit of sabotage back. I considered contacting Elena myself, but I didn't know her personally, and I didn't want to intrude on her life. She was a stranger who also deserved better than to be manipulated. I debated for days, pacing my small apartment, trying to figure out if reaching out to her would help or just cause chaos. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that if the roles were reversed, I'd want to know the truth. I'd want to know that the ex who suddenly reappeared was fresh off a last-ditch proposal to some other woman. That he wasn't some star-crossed lover, but a manipulative jerk who hopped from one possible future to the next, whichever would have him. So, I did it. I found Elena's social media, typed out a short, respectful message. Hi, Elena. We don't know each other, but I was in a relationship with Name. He left abruptly after proposing to me, apparently to find you. This might be none of my business, but I wanted you to know he was literally crying over your engagement the day before he proposed to me. I don't know what your situation is, but I think you deserve the full picture. I have no agenda besides letting you know that he tried to use me as a backup plan. I'm not seeking him back. I just don't want you to be misled. I hit send. Then I spent days in a cold sweat, worrying I'd overstepped or come off as a crazy ex. Eventually, she responded. Her tone was polite but curt. Thank you for reaching out. We've spoken, and it's complicated, but I appreciate your honesty. That was it. I let it go. If she was still set on her fiancé, maybe she'd see my ex's intrusion for what it was. I didn't want to meddle more. That small act felt like enough of a measure to ensure she knew he was a hypocrite. Time rolled on. I threw myself into work, started reconnecting with friends I'd neglected during the meltdown. My heartbreak stung, but it was healing. Because I had clarity. The man was a fraud, chasing illusions, and I was free. I was living day by day, forging a better routine. Then, unexpectedly, I got another message from Elena. She asked me if we could speak. I agreed. She called me on a voice chat, sounding exhausted and upset. She confirmed that he'd begged her to call off her engagement, that he insisted they could rebuild what they had in college. According to her, she was never tempted. She loved her fiancé. She said, he felt like a stranger, like someone who didn't respect that my life had moved on. She also thanked me for letting her know about the proposal. It forced her to see him in a more realistic light. He apparently told her that I'd proposed to him and that he had rejected me because he loved her. She said it all sounded fishy from the start, but she hadn't known what was true. My message shed light on the reality. He'd tried to propose to me as a panic move. She also mentioned that her fiancé confronted him, telling him to back off. My ex had responded with hostility, calling the fiancé unworthy. They nearly came to blows, or so she said. The fiancé was ready to file a restraining order if he kept harassing them. That made me snort a bit, because it matched the unhinged desperation I'd glimpsed in that last week we spent together. Elena told me that if I wanted, she'd confirm any detail for me in writing, in case I needed proof that he'd lied about our relationship. Part of me wanted to gather evidence, maybe to confront him in a massive blow-up if he ever returned. But I realized, as we spoke, that I didn't need more proof. I'd already been betrayed, used, and tossed aside. My revenge, so to speak, was ensuring he faced the harsh truth that no one wanted him as a consolation prize. He'd lost me, and he'd never have her back. He was stuck in the middle of nowhere, his illusions shattered. He'd also messed up his professional standing by leaving so abruptly, and he had a potential restraining order looming. That felt like a satisfying outcome. Still, I thanked Elena, told her I was grateful she'd reached out, and we parted on decent terms. Months passed. I heard through the grapevine that my ex's trip ended disastrously. Elena's fiancé apparently told him if he didn't leave them alone, he'd escalate matters. So my ex eventually slunk back, though he never contacted me. He tried to salvage his freelance gig, only to find that rumors had spread about him abandoning projects midstream. Some clients refused to work with him. People who used to admire him viewed him as unstable and unreliable. He apparently started couch surfing at a friend's place because he no longer had a permanent address in the city. Meanwhile, I was thriving at my marketing job, forging new connections, focusing on self-care. The contrast was almost painfully satisfying. I expected that eventually he'd reach out to me, if only to attempt some half-baked apology or to ask for forgiveness. But that never happened. Instead, I got an indirect message from yet another friend who said that he was complaining about me, calling me petty for turning everyone against him. That made me laugh. I hadn't turned anyone against him. He'd done it himself by running off, lying, and trying to wreck someone's engagement. But of course, people like him rarely accept responsibility. It was about this time that he tried, in a sneaky way, to arrange to pick up his old belongings from my place. He sent a mutual friend with a message. He wants his stuff. He says you're holding it hostage. Hostage, really? I texted back politely. Sure. If he wants to pick it up, he can come himself and schedule a time. Otherwise, I can ship it to an address. But he needs to provide one, and he'll pay shipping. The friend relayed the message. My ex refused to come in person, probably because he was too proud or embarrassed. He also apparently had no stable address. So I remained firm. The stuff stayed with me, locked away in a closet I barely opened. The idea of discarding or selling his belongings tempted me, but I didn't want to do anything illegal or unethical. I was content just letting them sit there. Every time I glanced at the box, I remembered the day he proposed to me right after sobbing about someone else. That memory still made my stomach turn. Even so, I had no intention of moving on any plan to burn or destroy them. I didn't need that kind of drama. My revenge was the truth, laid bare, and the chaos that followed him afterward. Finally, one day, I got a text from a new number. It was him using a different phone. He said, "Hey, let's talk. I think we both could be mature about this." I stared at the text for a while. I considered ignoring it, but curiosity got the better of me. Maybe I wanted to hear if he'd attempt an apology or a justification. I told him to call me if he wanted to talk, and after an hour he did. His voice sounded weary, lacking that confident bravado I used to know. He started with small talk, asking how I was. Then he said, "Look, I'm sorry for everything that happened. I was going through a tough time. I didn't handle things well." That was laughably inadequate. But I stayed quiet, letting him dig his own grave. He rambled about how he'd realized Elena was out of reach, that she wasn't the person he remembered from college. He made it sound like a mutual realization, as if they'd parted on friendly terms. I knew better, but I didn't bother correcting him. Then he said, "I proposed because I thought you'd say yes, that we could build a good life together. I did love you, but I guess I was just confused." I nearly spat out my drink. Confused? That's what he called it? Using me as a backup plan, then fleeing the country? But I still listened, letting him drone on. Finally, he asked if there was any way we could try again. Maybe not jump straight to engagement, but at least see if we could rebuild trust. He tried to sweeten it by saying how he realized I was the stable choice, the one who could ground him. That phrase, stable choice, made my temper flare. I told him calmly, "I'm not anyone's stable choice or safe bet. I was your girlfriend, who you disrespected on every level. I'm not interested in any second chances." He tried to argue. He asked me to think of the history we had. I retorted that our history was full of manipulation, half-truths, and him pining for someone else. Then he got defensive. "You never understood how hard it was for me to let go of my first love." I shot back. "Then you shouldn't have started anything serious with me. You used me, and when I didn't say yes to your panic proposal, you ran off to chase her. Stop pretending this is a misunderstanding." That shut him up for a moment. He tried one last angle. "Maybe we just need therapy, or maybe we can meet in person to talk. I can get your favorite takeout. We can laugh about all the old memories." I cut him off. "No, I'm done. Don't contact me again unless it's about picking up your crap. And even then, you can give me a shipping address." I heard him breathe heavily on the other end. Then, With a resigned tone, he said, "Fine, be like that." I hung up, shaking with adrenaline. My choice was clear. Never forgive, never forget. He deserved to live with the consequences. In the aftermath of that call, I felt a strange mixture of triumph and sadness. My mind drifted back to the early days, when everything felt new and bright, and I realized how thoroughly he'd tainted it all. There were good memories, sure, but overshadowed by the revelation that his heart was never fully in it. Yet I didn't regret the stance I took. Betrayal isn't something I can just wave off with an apology, not after he'd turned my life inside out. Weeks turned into months. Through mutual connections, I learned he was struggling financially. He ended up staying in a cheap sublet. He still had no stable address that he was willing to share with me, so his prized possessions stayed with me. People said he was moody and withdrawn, blaming external circumstances for his difficulties. Typical. I had no sympathy. In quieter moments, I felt a twinge of pity for the man I once loved. But then I remembered the tears he shed not for me, but for her, and the half-baked proposal that followed the very next day. Any shred of pity evaporated. I moved on. I really did. I even went on a couple of dates, though nothing serious. I focused on my career, found new hobbies, reconnected with friends, and discovered a surprising sense of freedom. For the first time in years, I didn't have to worry about measuring up to some phantom ex in my boyfriend's mind. I wasn't the backup plan or the second choice. I was simply myself, living my own life on my own terms. Then came a final twist. He tried to blackmail me in a pathetic attempt to get his stuff back. One evening, I got a message from him that said, "If you don't return my belongings by the end of the week, I'll tell everyone you're a psycho who refused my proposal because you're seeing someone else behind my back." I literally laughed out loud. This was the same man who told me he wanted therapy and to start over? Now he was threatening me with rumors, because he knew I wouldn't hand over his prized possessions without an address or him coming in person. I responded calmly, "Go ahead and tell anyone you want. The people who matter already know you're full of it. I offered to ship everything. You didn't give me an address. That's on you." He sputtered more threats, claiming he'd spread lies to my workplace or to my family. I countered by reminding him that if he started a smear campaign, I had plenty of evidence and testimony from Elena about his actual behavior. Plus, I had screenshots of his messages to me. He went quiet after that. A couple of days later, a mutual friend told me he'd given up and was moving to another city to try for a fresh start. I guess he decided the local gossip was too much. I didn't celebrate, but I did feel a load lift off my shoulders. No more dealing with him physically lurking around. No more petty threats. He was gone, hopefully for good this time. And I was proud I'd stood my ground. Sometimes revenge is simply refusing to cave to manipulation and letting the truth do its work. I didn't have to burn his stuff or smash his phone or anything dramatic. I just had to expose him for who he was and let the consequences unfold. Friends occasionally asked if I felt closure. It took a while to figure out how I felt. Betrayal leaves scars, after all. I'd invested years, of my life in a relationship that turned out to be a sham on his end. But I also felt that in a way, I had closure. I never forgave him, never softened. Some might say that's unhealthy, but it felt right. Why should I forgive someone who tried to gaslight me into believing a frantic proposal was genuine love, who left me to chase another woman, and then tried to bully me into giving him a second chance? Not everyone deserves forgiveness. Sometimes holding on to that boundary is what keeps you strong. Eventually, I did figure out what to do with his belongings. They stayed in my closet for a long time. He never provided any shipping details, and none of his friends wanted to get involved. I reached out one last time, stating, "I'm disposing of everything by the end of next week. Let me know by then if you have a place where I can send it. Otherwise, it's gone." No response. So I donated or trashed most of it. The jersey I sold online to some collector who was thrilled to find it. The money I got wasn't huge, but it felt like a final, fitting piece of justice. In the end, I've learned a lot from this. I learned to trust my gut when it signals that someone's mind is elsewhere. I learned that unconditional loyalty isn't a virtue when it means ignoring red flags. And I learned that sometimes the best revenge is simply moving on and letting the other person's bad behavior drag them down. Did I orchestrate some big dramatic takedown? No. But I lit a few small matches, told the truth to Elena, made sure our mutual friends and his workplace knew why he'd vanished. And that was enough. It sealed the cracks in the image he'd tried to maintain. He did the rest to himself by refusing to own up to his mistakes. I know some people are going to say, "Aren't you worried about the karma of not forgiving him?" Honestly, no. He showed no genuine remorse. Even his so-called apologies were laced with self-justification or an attempt to reel me back in. I have no space in my life for that toxic cycle. My healing doesn't hinge on offering him forgiveness. My healing comes from recognizing my own self-worth and refusing to let him treat me like a fallback plan ever again. Sometimes I think about how my life might have turned out if he hadn't seen that engagement announcement. Maybe he'd have continued stringing me along, never acknowledging the hold his ex had on his heart. Maybe I'd have married him eventually, only to find out later that he was pining for someone else. In a way, that dramatic breakdown and subsequent flight was the best thing that could have happened. It exposed everything. The heartbreak I felt then saved me from a deeper pain down the line. If he'd never cried over her, if he'd never proposed the next day, I might have spent more years living in ignorance. So ironically, his meltdown set me free. Sure, it hurt like hell at first, but it gave me clarity. It's like ripping off a bandage fast. It stings, but at least you see the wound for what it is. Then you can start to heal. I'm not going to pretend I'm fully over every emotional scar. Sometimes I still get angry recalling the look in his eyes when he proposed. That desperation. It was never about me. It was always about him chasing a security blanket for his fragile ego. But that anger no longer rules me. It's just a reminder of what can happen when you settle for someone who's not wholeheartedly in it with you. Now, I focus on my own projects and the people who genuinely care about me. The city doesn't feel so suffocating anymore. I've even started seeing someone new, slowly, without rushing. This time, I'm paying close attention to every subtle cue, making sure no lingering X or unaddressed baggage is overshadowing us, because I refuse to be anyone's second choice. We deserve better than that. I still see posts on Reddit from people with heartbreak stories, and I get it. There's that universal shock when you realize the person you love is capable of betrayal. But I also see the recurring theme of wanting closure or trying to find a reason to forgive. My take? If the betrayal is deep enough, if the disrespect is blatant, forgiveness isn't an obligation. Sometimes the best thing to do is to let them live with the wreckage of their own choices. They'll either learn from it or keep repeating the same patterns. Either way, that's not my concern anymore. If he ever reads this, I hope he recognizes himself. I hope he finally acknowledges that you can't treat people like placeholders. You can't cry over one woman, propose to another the next day, then chase the first woman overseas and expect a warm welcome when you return. Life doesn't work like that. We all make mistakes. But there's a line between a slip-up and a calculated pattern of using people to fill whatever void is in your heart. That line, once crossed, can never be uncrossed. This is my story. It may not have the neat fairy tale ending where I emerge unscathed and meet my perfect soulmate overnight. But it's real, and it's mine, and that's enough. I walked away when I realized I was being used. I refused to forgive him for his betrayal. I made sure people knew what he'd done. He faced the consequences, and I held on to my self-respect. That, to me, is justice. He can keep his desperation and his lies. I'll keep building a life that's honest, open, and free from the ghost of someone else's past. And that's what matters. The takeaway from all this is that self-respect is priceless. If someone tries to make you their backup plan, walk away. If they betray you like that, you owe them nothing. Let them suffer the fallout of their own actions. Sometimes, that's the sweetest revenge you can get. Because there's no bigger punishment for a person so wrapped up in themselves than seeing the person they wronged thrive without them. And trust me, I'm thriving. I still have tough days, but I also have a clear conscience. My future is wide open, free of his baggage, free of his confusion. For that, I'm grateful. The moment I realized I'd finally moved on was the moment I stopped thinking about how to retaliate and started focusing on my own happiness. I recognized that what he'd done was so appalling, it didn't deserve forgiveness. And so I continue on, forging my path. He can blame me, or call me names, or run away to whichever city he wants. None of that changes the fact that I survived his betrayal and came out stronger. In a sense, that's the final chapter of my revenge. I'm better without him, and I don't hide that truth from anyone. I imagine someone reading this and asking, "But don't you worry about being bitter?" My answer is, bitterness only poisons you if you let it consume your life. I hold on to what happened as a lesson, not an obsession. I'm not out there pining for him or checking his every move on social media. That chapter is closed. If I think of him, it's a passing thought of relief that I dodged a bullet. I'm out here living and loving. Wisely, yes, but openly. There's nothing bitter about that. It's reclaiming your narrative from someone who tried to write you into theirs as a footnote. In some alternate universe, maybe he apologized sooner, or never cried over someone else, or asked me to marry him out of genuine love. But that's not my reality. My reality is that I was the fallback. I was the stable choice. I was the consolation prize after he lost his nerve about losing Elena forever. And once I saw that, I left. No turning back. No second chances. If someone betrays you that profoundly, you don't owe them an ounce of empathy. Empathy is for people who stumble accidentally, not for those who orchestrate heartbreak with cunning or desperation. I hope if anyone else has found themselves in a similar situation, witnessing a partner obviously longing for someone else, only to be thrown a hasty proposal, you realize you're not alone, but also realize you deserve so much more. Don't cling to the idea that love can be forced, or that maybe you owe them a second shot. If they truly loved you, they wouldn't treat you like a backup in the first place. So walk away, keep your dignity, and if you choose revenge, make it something that costs you nothing but reveals everything. In my case, shining light on the truth was enough. When I think back to the moment I saw him break down in tears over that engagement announcement, it's almost surreal now. How could I have suspected so little? Then again, I guess I'd never encountered such blatant disrespect in a relationship before. Sometimes, heartbreak is a teacher. It taught me to trust what I see, not what I wish to see. That's a painful lesson, but a valuable one. So that's the story. He cried for her, then proposed to me. I refused. He left to chase her, failed spectacularly, and returned to a life that offered him no warm embrace. Meanwhile, I lived my own life, letting people see the truth of what he'd done. My revenge was never forgiving him, never lying for him, never covering for his mistakes, and never letting him manipulate me again. I don't regret a thing. I've told close friends that if they ever see me wavering, if I ever consider letting him slither back in, they should knock some sense into me immediately. Not that I expect to waver, but emotional vulnerability is tricky. At least now I'm prepared. And that's the silver lining. Once you go through something like this, you come out stronger, sharper, and far less likely to ignore the warnings next time. That's the power of a heartbreak that doesn't break you, but fuels you. He's gone from my life now, and that's how it'll stay. If he tries to pop up again, I'll remind him of everything he did and send him on his way. I owe him nothing, not even my anger anymore. At the end of the day, the best revenge is living well, loving authentically, and remembering that no one is entitled to your forgiveness. He certainly isn't. That's the part that might haunt him forever, knowing I never softened, never once gave him that comforting absolution. And I'm more than fine with that. He made his choices, and now he can live with them. That's my story. If you've read this far, thank you. I hope it resonates with someone out there who's been used as a backup plan. Trust your instincts, guard your self-respect, and if revenge is necessary, make sure it's something that doesn't compromise your own integrity. In my experience, the truth and your refusal to be a doormat can be the most potent form of justice. I wish I'd seen the signs sooner, but at least I saw them eventually. And I'm proud of how I handled it in the end. No forgiveness, no going back, just sweet, undeniable reality. He lost me, and he never got her back either. Poetic, isn't it? And honestly, I wouldn't have it any other way. I met Sean the day I turned 7. Our fathers both worked in construction, and one weekend, my dad insisted on bringing me along to a project he was overseeing. I had no idea I was about to meet the kid who'd become my best friend. Sean was sitting on a stack of materials, swinging his legs, looking bored. I remember how he glanced up at me, sized me up, then asked if I liked comic books. That was all it took. We discovered we both collected the same series, which led to us trading issues and reading them together while our dads hammered away. Every weekend after that, we'd ask to tag along to help, but really we just sat in corners, flipping through pages, or ran around the half-finished sites, imagining we were superheroes. We became inseparable. Sleepovers turned into camping trips with our families. We always asked each other for advice, helped one another with homework, and made sure we never felt alone. In middle school, we had each other's backs whenever bullies popped up. We even orchestrated an elaborate prank on one especially nasty bully in 8th grade. And while we both got suspended for 2 days, it cemented our status as a loyal duo. Our birthdays were just a month apart. So in high school, we had a tradition of throwing a combined party at one of our houses, inviting classmates to celebrate with us. Those memories became the building blocks of our friendship. We kept each other sane when puberty and teenage drama threatened to pull us apart. Even as we developed different interests, Sean took an interest in mechanics, while I joined a photography club. Our bond never wavered. We ended up at different colleges, but we stayed in touch. I remember phone calls that stretched until dawn, where we'd catch up on each other's lives. He joined a fraternity, got into intramural sports, and I started exploring my passion for documentary photography. But we never lost track of the friendship that meant so much to both of us. After college, we both moved back to our hometown for a while. I did some freelance photography gigs, while Sean started working as a mechanic at a local auto shop. Even though his dream was to run his own garage one day, he enjoyed the learning process and the camaraderie at his workplace. Our paths diverged again when I landed a job that took me 2 states away, but the tradition of catching up continued. We'd talk on the phone, chat online, and sometimes meet during the holidays. Over time, Sean found a better job out of state. We were no longer in the same place, but we were used to the distance. We always said we'd settle down in the same city eventually, open our dream businesses across the street from each other, and keep that youthful spirit of ours alive. Then one day, Sean introduced me to the woman he was planning to marry. We were in our late 20s by then, and he told me he'd met someone he believed was the one. Her name was Alyssa. I saw photos of the two of them on social media first. He sent me a link to her account and told me to check it out. She was tall, glamorous, and had this sharp jawline and fierce gaze. She didn't look like the warm, approachable types Sean usually dated, but I kept that thought to myself because I trusted he knew what he was doing. A few weeks later, he actually organized a meetup. I drove down to see him and finally meet Alyssa in person. When I got there, everything seemed normal at first. She was polite enough, maybe a bit standoffish. She shook my hand, asked me about my job, and gave me a polite smile from time to time. We went to dinner, and the first odd moment happened when Sean mentioned a memory from our childhood. He started telling the story of how I'd saved up money from a lemonade stand to buy him a new comic book after his entire collection was destroyed in a basement flood. Alyssa gave me this strange look. She asked me if it was a joke, if I'd done it just for attention, because who actually does that for a friend? I remember feeling a sting, but I shook it off. She might have been trying to be humorous, and I wasn't used to her style yet. Sean, however, didn't laugh. He clarified that I'd really gone out of my way to help him, because that's what we did for each other. Alyssa just nodded, changed the subject, and the conversation plodded on. For the rest of the night, she mostly focused on Sean. I stayed polite, contributed when asked, and tried not to read too deeply into things. Months passed, and I saw them again during the holidays. My parents had moved closer to my sister, so I stayed at a hotel when I visited. Sean and I hung out at his place, an apartment he now shared with Alyssa. It felt weird. Alyssa seemed to have an entire agenda for what Sean could and couldn't do. She complained when he was 5 minutes late to dinner, complained if the living room was slightly messy, complained that the two of us were discussing old times instead of focusing on the holiday activities she'd meticulously planned. She even criticized the gifts we got for each other, as if we were no longer kids and shouldn't be exchanging silly gifts. I gave him a vintage collectible from our favorite comic series, and he gifted me a custom camera strap. Alyssa pointed out that the camera strap was pointless because I already had one, and that the vintage comic stuff was junk. Sean did this anxious laugh, trying to keep the peace, but I could see in his eyes he felt embarrassed. Despite these red flags, Sean insisted Alyssa was just stressed out. He said she was planning a big career move, had family issues back home, and that I shouldn't worry. I understood stress, and Sean's relationship was none of my business. if he was happy. I took him at his word. That year went by, I got busier, and I rarely heard from Sean. We'd text occasionally, but phone calls were brief. Whenever I suggested we meet up, he said something about Alyssa's schedule or that they were traveling. I started feeling the distance in our relationship, but I never blamed him. I assumed life was taking over, as it often does, and tried to be supportive from afar. Then, out of nowhere, he called me one night to say he was getting married. He sounded excited, but a bit tense. He said the wedding would be in about 8 months, and he wanted me to be there. I asked, half-jokingly, if I'd be his best man, and he said the best man spot was going to his older brother. I told him that was fair. He laughed, apologized that he couldn't make me best man, but insisted I'd have a special seat. I felt that surge of happiness you get when your best friend is about to take a big step. I was thrilled for him, no matter how I felt about Alyssa. Over the next few months, I started hearing more details about their wedding. Sean told me about the venue, the approximate date, a discussion about a potential color scheme, all that typical wedding chatter. I was dealing with some big changes in my life. Relocating for a new job, searching for a decent apartment, sorting out personal finances. I'd ask for official details, but Sean would say, "We'll mail you all the info. Alyssa has it under control. Just block off that day." So I'd nod along, waiting. At one point I told him, "Hey, I haven't gotten a formal invite yet." He apologized and promised I'd get one soon. More time passed, and still no invitation. There were social media posts about the wedding from mutual friends. People celebrating the fact they'd received their invites. Someone shared a photo of a fancy envelope with a gold seal, presumably Alyssa's handiwork, and wrote, "Can't wait for the big day." Meanwhile, I was just waiting. I tried to convince myself that maybe the mail was slow, or maybe they had my old address and it got lost. I even texted Sean to confirm the address. He said he'd double-check with Alyssa. Then he went silent. More posts appeared, more excitement grew, and eventually people started booking flights and hotels. I kept telling myself not to overreact. Sean would never exclude me. We'd been best friends since we were kids. There had to be an explanation. One night, about a month before the wedding, I decided enough was enough. I called Sean directly. He answered, sounding rushed, but I dove in. "Dude, I never got an invitation." At first he laughed, as if he thought I was joking. I told him, "I'm not kidding. I legit never got anything in the mail, and I don't see an evite or any email or even a text about times and addresses. Everyone else is talking about their invites." The silence that followed was deafening. He stammered a bit, said that was impossible. Alyssa had told him all invites were sent, and of course I'd have mine. He asked if maybe I'd thrown it out by accident. I explained that I'd been checking my mail meticulously. Finally, he said, "Let me call you back," and hung up. An hour passed, then 2, then 3. Finally, he texted me, telling me we needed to talk in person, or at least on a video call. He sounded upset. I tried not to let my mind wander too far, but deep down, I had a suspicion that Alyssa had never sent me an invitation on purpose. When we finally spoke again, he looked miserable. He admitted that Alyssa had confessed to not sending me an invitation. Her reasons, she claimed, were that we had bad blood, that I made her uncomfortable, and that my presence would create drama. He was bewildered, because he'd never known about any drama. He asked me, voice trembling, if something had happened between me and Alyssa that he didn't know about. I told him everything I could recall: dinners, gatherings, the gifts. I recounted how she once belittled me for giving him a collectible, how she seemed dismissive of our friendship. Nothing that would justify outright banning me from the wedding. Sean was quiet for a long time. He said he needed to talk to Alyssa again. A day later, he called back saying they'd had a huge fight. Alyssa had threatened to call off the wedding if I insisted on coming. He sounded devastated, torn. He asked me not to do anything rash, but it was too late for that. My blood was boiling. I was livid that she'd apparently been harboring some weird resentment toward me. Every look, every backhanded comment, it all started to make sense. She was subtly pushing me out of Sean's life, and I had no idea until now. But I never expected her to stoop as low as to exclude me from his wedding, something I'd waited years to celebrate. The gall to lie to him, to let him believe I was invited, just so she could cut me out quietly. It was a betrayal not just of me, but of him too. He'd wanted me there, and she'd basically gone behind his back and tried to rewrite the guest list. I might have let it go if she'd apologized, but according to Sean, she stood her ground and insisted it was her right to control the wedding. She'd told him, "You have your family and your close friends. He's not family, and I don't consider him a close friend." It stung, but I wasn't going to beg. Sean's reaction caught me off guard. He was furious on my behalf. He told me he confronted her, demanded to know why she disliked me so much, and threatened to call off the entire wedding if she couldn't give him a valid reason. She refused to budge. She told him she considered me an overbearing presence, accused me of meddling in their relationship, and that I'd always been too close to him. Sean told her that was ridiculous, that we were friends long before she ever came along. She said that was exactly the problem. She wanted a fresh start with him, without the baggage of his old life, as if a best friend was just some leftover baggage to be tossed aside. The fight escalated, and Sean even left their apartment for a few nights. During this time, I kept my distance. I didn't want to meddle further. I told him I'd step aside if it meant saving his wedding, but he insisted that was out of the question. If she hated me, she needed to explain herself properly, or accept that I was a permanent fixture in his life. The meltdown was so severe, Sean said his parents were trying to intervene, but Alyssa's family stood by her, claiming the bride has final say on the guest list. The wedding was on the brink of collapse. People were calling me, messaging me, wanting to know if the rumors were true. I was torn between wanting to help Sean and wanting to stand up for myself. In the middle of it all, I got a call from Alyssa herself. She tried to sound calm, but there was this edge to her voice. She asked if I really wanted to be at the wedding, given that it was their day and not about me. She implied that my presence would overshadow her. I found that bizarre, because who was I to overshadow a bride at her own wedding? I told her I just wanted to support my best friend, who'd been like a brother to me. Her response was that if I truly cared about him, I'd respect her boundaries and stay away. I refused. She got angry, said that I was a selfish person clinging to the past, then hung up. That was the end of that conversation. A week before the wedding, Sean called me again. He was a wreck. He said he and Alyssa had reached an impasse. She insisted I not come, and he insisted I should. Neither side would compromise. He told her that if she barred me from attending, he would invite me anyway, or possibly call it off altogether. She cried, said she'd call off the wedding herself if he went behind her back. There were nights they didn't speak to each other. The tension was unbelievable. Eventually, Alyssa's father stepped in. He tried to mediate, claiming that if Sean wanted me there so badly, he should be able to have one or two people on the guest list who might not be the bride's favorites. That only sparked more fighting, because Alyssa's mother then told her daughter that she shouldn't start her marriage by letting the husband walk all over her. It turned into a full-on family feud. I reached my breaking point. Seeing Sean in so much pain and confusion lit a fire in me. I'd done nothing wrong, but Alyssa was painting me as some meddling, overshadowing villain. I'd been told I was unwanted, forced to witness Sean's agony, and I'd had enough. I decided that if Alyssa wanted to play dirty, I wasn't going to roll over and let her. I never intended to sabotage their wedding, but I sure wasn't going to forgive her. I wanted a measure of justice, or at least a way to expose her manipulative nature so she couldn't keep hurting Sean. My first step was gathering every piece of evidence I had that illustrated Alyssa's attitude towards me. Texts, recorded voicemails, screenshots of her comments on social media. They painted a picture of her consistently ridiculing me, belittling my gifts, or complaining about my presence. There was also a message from Hurst where she admitted to not sending the invitation. But that was part of a longer thread where she justified it by calling me toxic. I didn't have a plan yet, but I knew that if the time came, I would use this to show Sean how she really felt. He knew part of it, but I suspected she was feeding him lies about me behind the scenes. The next step was more delicate. I needed to figure out how to protect Sean from her manipulations, because it was clear she wasn't going to stop at excluding me. If she was this controlling now, imagine how she'd be once they were married. But I wasn't sure how to proceed without making things worse. I was torn between loyalty to my friend, who still, despite everything, believed there might be a happy resolution, and my anger at the woman who tried to erase me from his life. Then, something unexpected happened. Sean discovered that Alyssa had meddled in his relationships with other friends too. One of Sean's coworkers casually mentioned that he was surprised he was invited, because he knew so many people hadn't gotten their invitations. That conversation led to Sean calling some old college friends and discovering that at least 2 of them also never received formal invitations, even though Alyssa told him they had been sent. This fiasco was bigger than just me. Alyssa was controlling the narrative of who Sean was allowed to have in his life. Sean confronted her, outraged. She doubled down, saying it was normal for a bride to limit the guest list if she felt uncomfortable with certain people. According to him, she named me and a few others as influences she'd rather not have around. He asked her to clarify what made us such negative influences, and she rattled off petty or non-existent reasons. The coworker? He was a bad influence because he and Sean used to party in college. The old friends? They had teased her once about being uptight, so she decided they didn't deserve to come. None of it made sense. It became a pattern of control. Sean was furious. He told me he nearly packed his bags for good, but she promised to reinstate those other friends on the guest list. Just not me. She still singled me out, as if I was the real threat. It made me wonder if she was jealous of our friendship. The idea that I was too close to him was probably her real motive. 40 likes, and I upload continue.